It's not a thrilling plot, but it's addictively interesting. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of All the Seas of the World by Guy Gavriel Kay. This comes out in this month, I think, 2022. It is a fantasy novel from Penguin Random House, and I got this book as an ARC from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. So, All the Seas of the World is an immersive, complex, and realism-based fantasy with interesting characters and a sprawling plot that serves to show how all decisions, even minor ones, have impacts that we can't predict. So what's it about? On a dark night along a lonely stretch of coast, a small ship sends two people ashore. Their purpose is assassination. They have been hired by two of the most dangerous men alive to alter the balance of power in the world. If they succeed, the consequences will affect the destinies of empires and lives both great and small. One of those arriving at that beach is a woman abducted by corsairs as a child and sold into years of servitude. Having escaped, she is trying to chart her own course and is bent upon revenge. Another is a seafaring merchant who still remembers being exiled as a child with his family from their home for their faith, a moment that never leaves him. In what follows, through a story both intimate and epic, unforgettable characters are immersed in the fierce and deadly struggles that define their time. So before even getting into a review, I just want to say I had no idea going into this novel that it takes place in an already developed world from two other novels. And while I don't think that was detrimental to my understanding of the story or the plot or the characters, it did feel like some exposition was lacking on my part. I was just kind of like, okay, I'm not really sure I am. So the blurb that I read on NetGalley that made me want to read the book, and I also liked the cover because the cover is really pretty, didn't say it was set during an approximation of the Renaissance. So I wasn't sure what the time period was supposed to be based on when I was reading it, because when I read fantasy, I usually assume it's kind of set in like a medieval or pastoral setting, at least something that's like, doesn't have like technology. So this wouldn't have mattered to me at all, not really knowing this, until later in the novel when guns and cannon show up, and I'm just like, wait, guns? Like, what type of guns? What type of cannons? Why are there cannons and guns? No one used these before. Where did these come from? So, and then upon finishing the book, I went on Goodreads, and the blurb there is longer, and I was just like, oh, okay. That does make sense if it's based on the Renaissance. However, it's not like you need to know anything about the Renaissance to enjoy this or to understand the plot of it. I guess I would have kind of been able to picture things differently if I'd read it knowing that, because I was picturing it almost as more of a Middle Eastern setting than a kind of Italian setting, but doesn't really matter, I guess. The same story and the same characters and everything still applies. I just wanted to point that out to anybody else who is reading this not knowing that. Similarly, by the end of the book, I really, really enjoyed the novel, and there were times when I had trouble putting it down, but it did take a little bit for me to get into it. The reason was that the novel has two particular stylistic choices that take some adjusting to. The first is that the book serves to give up a lot of its backstory in rather long info dumps, and the second is that it invokes the two-sentence wrap-up of the result of a scene before actually describing what happens in the scene. So you're kind of told what's going to happen or what the result is before you read about it. I'm not particularly fond of this type of narration because I find it's a bit spoilery. Some people really like this direct foreshadowing, and that's fine. As I said, it's a stylistic choice. It's just because it's not my preference doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. I mean, it's executed very well. It's just not something that I particularly like. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to critique the novel at all. It's such a rich novel. It has so much detail. It's packed with these fascinating and fun characters. Even the side characters feel like fully fleshed out people. And the prose is just lovely. I would argue that it's almost like a literary fiction, because the novel definitely uses a stream of consciousness style in that the point of view will shift to another person and pretty much tell their life story before jumping back into the main storyline again. Kind of like a Mrs. Dalloway kind of approach. I really like that. I guess the info dumps that I was talking about at the start, you're not kind of aware that it's doing the stream of consciousness thing until later. So retroactively, they were info dumps, but they were part of the narrative style. But going into the novel, I wasn't prepared for that. And that's why they felt a bit why it took a while for me to kind of adjust to the style. So I'm just warning you guys ahead of time that the novel uses a stream of consciousness style to depart information, so just be prepared for that when you get started. And if you know that going in, it probably won't bother you. It didn't bother me, it just like took me a while to kind of get into it. Anyway, God, I keep rambling today. While there are action scenes in the novel, it's definitely not a sword and sorcery fantasy, but one that uses the backdrop of fantasy to delve into themes of revenge, self-identity, home, and purpose, lots of kind of deeper things. I really liked the characters. Nadia is tough, guarded, aloof, and determined, but her pretty tragic backstory shapes a lot of her personality, and it's great to see her kind of grow and learn how to deal with her past. There's definitely not the idea that, she's one thing happens and her trauma is gone. We definitely know that she's going to be dealing with this trauma for the rest of her life, but it's great to see how she is able to move with it to kind of propel herself forward in her life, and she's not stuck anymore in kind of the mindset and the mentality that she was at the start of the novel. So it's very great to see that. That was a very realistic way of depicting that kind of trauma. Raphael, he's the merchant. He was likable, albeit he's a bit boring as a person, but not everyone has to be an over-the-top personality, especially with these other people like this guy named Folko, who's pretty big personality-wise, and the two bad guys. So, it's nice actually to have somebody in there that is reliable and just kind of keeps an even keel, and I think that's why Nadia liked him too, I suppose, why they were partners. The plot is too complex to give even a cursory overview without spoilers, as it's less a straightforward plot than showing how small decisions and big decisions can spawn large consequences. As such, the story feels authentic to real life, and you're never sure what is going to happen because, like real life, small little decisions make big changes. It's not a thrilling plot, but it's addictively interesting. It's both a serious and a safe story. As you can tell by the tone that there aren't going to be graphic depictions like in a grimdark fantasy, yet it still deals with effects of slavery and assault and things like that. So I really liked that. It felt like I wasn't like on the edge of my seat waiting that something bad and gross was gonna happen. Which can be sometimes, the thrilling part of fantasy that's darker or kind of high fantasy sometimes. But this definitely doesn't have that, though there are moments of violence and things like that. The novel has a lot going for it. It has normalized queer representation, which was really nice to see. It has some good moments of humor. I did laugh a few times in the novel. It's very poignant, and it has gorgeous lines of prose. I do highly recommend it, but it's not a novel you can just turn your brain off to read. It requires a more active engagement, and I actually really liked that about the book overall. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you check out the book if you're into this type of fantasy. I do have two things I wanted to talk about that are spoilers, so you can stay tuned for that if you don't plan on reading this book, or if you have read it already. If you have read it already, let me know in the comments what you thought about it, and if you've read any other works by Guy Gavriel Kay. I know he's written Tigana, which I have up there. I don't know if you can see it. It's right there. It might not be. It's just in the screen. I haven't read it yet, though. It's on my list. It's kind of big. But I haven't read anything else of his, and I wasn't aware until I read his bio that he's Canadian like me, so yay. Anyway, I'm getting to the spoilers now, so thanks for watching. So the first one I want to mention is that I thought the murder of what was his name? I can't remember, but anyway, the guy at the start that gets murdered, I thought that whole scenario was so funny. It was so funny. I mean, it was awful, but it was just like the poet guy and just that was so good. That's kind of where the story started picking up for me, was at that point. I was like, okay, I see where this book is going. I understand the tone now, and yeah, that scene was great. I really liked how Nadia changes her name. I thought that was wonderful. I didn't want to say it in the main review, obviously, but I really like how she changes her name to Lania and kind of takes on a new identity. I thought that was great. Or takes on her old identity, and how she reconnects with her brother. I thought that was such a wonderful, wonderful plot. And I really liked of course I liked Reyna, the politician, queen lady, whoever she was. You know me, I'm not very good with titles and aristocracy, so I can't remember who's who and who's what. But I really liked her. I thought she was great, and I think she was in this story long enough that I really liked her, but not too much that I learned of her flaws. There was two things, though, in the book that I didn't particularly enjoy. The first was, why does Lania have to get with Raphael in the end? I didn't ship them at all, and we so rarely get stories of women and men staying as just friends by the end of the novel that this felt kind of like a letdown that happened. I was kind of like, really? I could have just let them be friends. Like, I didn't feel the sexual connection between them at all. I would have actually preferred if Lania got with Guillen at the end. Is he the one that was the one that was in mourning? Yeah, you know, like down the line if she'd gotten with him, because they seemed to kind of hit it off. I don't know. Or no one. I also didn't understand, so people have read this, obviously, explain this to me. Why, in a world without magic, Lania has that weird connection to Leora, that little girl. If this sort of thing was prevalent in the world while reading, I wouldn't have needed this explanation, but because it's the only magical thing about it, I don't understand what it was or why it would link them together. Maybe I missed it somehow, but I wasn't sure where that came from, and it kind of annoyed me the whole time. I was kind of like, why do they have this connection? How did this come about? I don't really know. I mean, these aren't major things, like that didn't like make me like drop stars or whatever. It's just a couple things that I wanted to mention because I wondered if other people who have read this share that opinion. So do you think that the magic connection was weird? And did you think that Lania and Raphael should have got together? Let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching.